everybody. I'm Dalton George. I'm your host, one of your hosts for the show Do You Even Live Here? And I'm also the mayor of Boone. I'm here with my co-host, who you know well if you know this show, Preston Blakely, the mayor of Fletcher. And today we have a special person who's going to help facilitate, talk to us a little bit as we reflect on 15 episodes and the end of what we're calling our first season, Mr. Jeremy Borden, or what I like to call him, Jeremy Borden, meanings unknown, because he has really been a key part in making this show happen. And is a dear friend to both of us. And so it's only appropriate as we reflect on real success in creating what we have with Do You Even Live Here, chatting with him a bit. But I want to give him a chance to introduce himself. So I got to hit him with the question he should have been expecting, which is, Jeremy, do you even live here? And why do you not like the right college sports team?
Thank you for that amazing introduction, Dalton. I am not going to bore the listeners with any explanation for the absolutely absurd nickname that you have decided to give me. So that'll just have to live in private. Thank you for having me. I guess I suggested myself because of the low budget production that we provide here at Beacon Media. So that's really really like the best thing that I can offer is I'm available and might as well do it. The real reason I'm here, of course, is to frankly turn the tables on you guys, take over as host this thing as it should be hosted. Just kidding. Really just about like getting both of you to reflect on this. But I'll quickly introduce myself. Jeremy Borden. I am the executive director at Beacon Media. We are in our third year. And just to say a couple words about Beacon, we are supporting Do You Even Live Here and a number of other projects. And we are built around really trying to reach marginalized communities across the state that we don't do a good job. Those of us who believe in democracy and who want a better North Carolina do not do a good job of reaching and communicating with consistently. This project started really as an outgrowth. I spent my career in journalism, mostly for newspapers and then freelancing for all kinds of different publications, including radio. But I've never done a podcast either. And so we've been, I think, learning alongside each other here. And I hopped over the political fence and worked for Greg Meyer when he was in the state legislature. He left recently. And both Greg, his wife, Kim Meyer, who's done a lot of really important political and legal work in the state, all had kind of a shared, yes, go back and listen to that show. That was a great one. We all just basically had like a shared vision and a shared, I think, critique of what was happening in North Carolina. And that was a failure to communicate, especially with Black, Latino, and rural communities across the state. And what we set out to do initially was really to gather what we called Beacon Voices, and we still do that. You all are two examples of Beacon Voices. We generally don't work with elected folks. These are normally like grassroots community leaders who are doing like incredible pro-democracy work around education, the environment, and a number of other issues in their communities. And it's like, what does it look like to bring media and infrastructure to people like that, build them up, get them better known, and get their ideas so that we can shift narratives around what it is to live in a place that has better wages, fair labor rights, an environment that works for everybody, an education system that works for everybody. And so, I think a lot of the confusion of this project comes as like, oh, this is like a Democratic Party thing. And it is not. And we are a nonpartisan nonprofit. And the reason is because like what we need to do on our side is to gather momentum around these ideas, issues, and people like yourselves. This is not about any one election or even any future election. This is about building momentum and support for these ideas and for people like you. And that is a very different way of thinking about politics, and it's a very different way of thinking about media. And it's hard. And I think with this podcast, like, which we call part of Radio Plus Digital. We're working on radio syndication so that we can reach folks in rural areas. What we want to do is highlight folks like you that are grounded in your communities and that have these ideas and want to push them forward. And so it's been really, before I say anything else, it has been really fun and exciting to work with you guys. And I think as we go forward, it's about how can we do like the kind of storytelling that we want to do to reach new folks, like well outside political bubbles and
Absolutely.
media bubbles too. Um, so
Now, where do you
with
live,
that, let
Jeremy?
me.
Tell us where you're
Oh, where
at,
do I
where
live?
you're
I didn't answer
based,
the
and how
question.
Do
you're
you even live
connected to
I'm
here?
North
more
Carolina.
comfortable. I'm more comfortable asking questions than answering them. I'm in Durham, North Carolina. Maybe you've heard of it. Dalton. Dalton is spending a lot more time in Durham as a new entrant to a program at Duke University, which I guess it's somewhere in Durham. Personally never heard of it,
Same.
and I do live here. In fact, I went to high school in Charlotte and stayed for and went to college at a place called UNC Chapel Hill, which is down the road. And I moved around for a long time. I did the newspaper thing and the journalism thing. I thought that I sort of, in my 20s, I really thought that I had to leave. I thought that it was like, okay, did the North Carolina thing. And then you look around after many years and living other places, and I'm very grateful for those experiences and living in South Carolina, Virginia, DC, working for the Washington Post and working for other publications and like getting that experience. But, at the end of the day, really, when you think about where do you want to spend like the rest of your life and where do you want to actually like be a part of a community, it was sort of like Chicago's pretty cold and not moving back to South Carolina for all kinds of reasons. I think North Carolina sounds pretty good to me, and so I certainly plan to stay here for the duration. And I think what we have that so many other places that I've lived don't have is just a willingness to try new things and a willingness to try to change things. And we should not take that for granted in North Carolina, but that's really why I wanted to move back and why I think I live here. And, even though I've sort of been in and out for a lot of my life.
Love that, Jeremy. And I'm disappointed that you're not in the mountains of West North Carolina, which is objectively the best place in North Carolina, and you're a part of the what Dalton calls the Flatlander community, and that's okay. We still love you just as much as you love us.
You love the word
I'm a
Flatlander, Preston. I'm glad I
proud
introduced you to
Flatlander. I will say this, coming up to Boonerang last week and getting to hang out with Dalton some, and it's 20 degrees cooler when you get there. I'm kind of like, oh, I think I get this, and it's gorgeous with the mountains. So I'm definitely not going to argue against Western North Carolina. It really is incredible. Um, all right, so I can kind of flip the tables on you guys. Let's first talk about the show, and then I do want to get to talking about July 4th, the 250th anniversary, some of the politics around that, some of the values that we've seen from the right and from the Trump administration. Um, but let's start with the show. I think it's really interesting to be working with two mayors. I think, and two young mayors. I think that a lot of people coming up in politics, frankly, even though a lot of more folks are on social media and doing some of that, you guys have really kind of exposed your stories and exposed what you think in a way that a lot of politicians, especially in North Carolina, are just really hesitant to do. They're really hesitant to really put themselves out there. And you guys have already done that in this first season in many ways. I think we're going to continue to do that more as Beacon Media supports this show and thinks about, how to do this even better. But I guess I'm just curious, like why you wanted to take that risk. I think in political circles it would be considered a risk. Preston, let's start with you.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that we lack so much in government and politics and elected officials now is just genuine authenticity, right? And I think one of the big reasons Dalton and I want to start this podcast is because so many of the conversations these days happen at like a 30,000 foot view, right? And everything's about national politics and everything, the social media and whatever folk in Washington or in Raleigh, in our case, are arguing about. But most of people's lives happen at the ground level, the street level, the folk that we interact with on a day-to-day basis in communities like Fletcher and Boone and Canton, because there's more of those communities than the Charlottes and the Raleighs and North Carolina. And I think there's a little bit of a misconception, or perhaps a lot of stories get overlooked in small towns, right? But there's a lot of really interesting stories and innovative ideas that happen in small town America, in small town North Carolina, and in Western North Carolina. And some of the most interesting leaders and creative individuals and entrepreneurs and community builders um, that I've met are working in these places that most people drive through without stopping. And we've had the opportunity to have a lot of interesting people on the show in our first season, from like Deborah, and the person that, and I'm forgetting her, Lori, that talked about the Healthy Opportunities pilot, to Andrew Iden, who's right here in my community in Henderson County, that's doing a lot of good work surrounding Hurricane Helene. And a lot of those stories need to be uplifted and told, because those are the real things that are happening on the ground. And to me, it's worth it to take those risks and uplift those stories, and talk about the day-to-day things that actually happen in North Carolina, and be genuine and authentic about it, without being so scripted and far away from reality. I mean, the conversations that you all hear us have on this show are genuinely and authentically Dalton and I, right? I mean, we're not writing up a script like we're Gavin
Yep.
Newsom, or somebody else that is a big politician that has a podcast. We hop on Zoom or Descript, and we have a conversation, and we have 2 meetings a week, and we're not saying this is how this is going to go, like play by play, right? We have a framework of what we're going to talk about, but but until we get behind the mic, we don't know what's going to happen. And we had these genuine conversations, and I think we lack that in government and politics. And I'm really proud of the project that Dalton, Jeremy, and the rest of our crew have come up with here at Do You Even Live Here? I think we've had those genuine, authentic conversations that aren't at 30,000 foot view that I've so sought and desired to have.
Yeah, let me just add context on Deborah and Lori for folks who did not hear those episodes. Beacon did a series of things around the Healthy Opportunities pilot, along with Carolina Forward and Resource Rural, which really did the heavy lifting on the production of an 8-minute documentary that highlighted this program that was really about, like, how do we meet people's basic needs? North Carolina was a leader in the entire country in doing this program, and then the legislature didn't fund it, along with a number of other things, when the budget ran out this year. And so we wanted to highlight the good work that happened there. This was about getting transportation and food and really, really basic things to people. But the bottom line was, it saved the state a lot of money. It saved the federal government a lot of money. But more than that, it gave people really dignity in their lives. And so we highlighted Lori Stradley from Impact Health and Deborah Augusti, who received benefits from the program. They remediated mold from her home and have allowed her and her young grandson, who's, I believe, 11 years old, really to survive in this world. And yeah, it was an incredible thing to be a part of.
And it's a story that needed to be uplifted, right? I mean, I think in politics we're really good at turning people into like caricatures, but like we want to actually be able to tell the stories with or allow them to tell their stories, right, through their own words, because I think it's a lot harder to say no or dismiss somebody, or not give them their dignity when you actually hear their story. And this is something that was really good that North Carolina did, and we should raise that up, and we should thank our legislators for doing something really good. But right now it doesn't exist, right? And we need to be able to advocate and let those folk tell those stories. And I think that's one of the best things that we've done in this podcast, is uplift people like Deborah and Lori and let them advocate for themselves and give them that platform.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. Dalton, same question. Yeah, talk about kind of your views on storytelling, and also like why you wanted to do something as crazy as throw all of your thoughts out there on a podcast as a young, up and coming politician who,
Yeah.
has already done a lot of things, and where a lot of people would think, hey, I think if you were to run this by, the typical political advisor, or like even just life advisor, hey, do you really want to put yourself out there like that? So why was that something you wanted to do?
Well, first, let me just say I love this format. As somebody that binges reality TV from time to time, this is like the sitting on the couch after we yelled at each other on Love Island or Below Deck. Like, this is the postscript. So, and you're like whoever the Love
I
is
love
blind.
Below Deck.
You're like the
This
Love
is
is
the
Blind
reunion.
instinct
Yeah.
guy. Yeah, this is the reunion. So that's awesome.
The
I've always wanted to be a part of one of
the
those.
the meta show.
But
We may not deserve it, but you know what?
yeah,
This is going to be therapeutic for
I
us.
wish Preston and I were in tuxes on a couch right now for this, but maybe next time. But I will say, as somebody, I'll start with this one quote that I often reflect on from this political leader, Hubert Humphrey, that I took a lot of inspiration from, especially as a young man who was the vice president in the '60s. He said, "Be careful what you say to the press because they might report it." And that's a kind of a funny quote, but that's how I feel almost about the podcast. And, we are at a time where I think even elected officials that want to seem authentic are still incredibly guarded. To Preston's point earlier, like, we don't have a script. We come in here and we try to be honest. And that creates these interesting dynamics where sometimes I poke fun at other progressive nonprofits, right? We've done that on this show. Sometimes we criticize the Democratic Party in a way that maybe would surprise some folks from two leaders in this way. And that does create significant risk, and long form content is going to allow people to clip things out of context. That's even happened to me, right? We've created some controversy even here in my local community due to people taking things out of context. And also, and I don't want to speak for Preston, but I know what Preston comes from. I know what I come from. I don't think we take this moment that we have for granted. We grew up as two guys that never thought we would be in elected office and have always wanted to serve community, but also still be a member of community and still try to talk like the folks in Fletcher and Boone and look like the people that we're trying to represent and act like those people. And so I think this is just doubling down on that, right? And just like, hey, this is Dalton's unfiltered take. And, if you vote for me, we might not always agree, but like at least I'm honest and candid in a way that I think is refreshing. And again, I think that's everybody, regardless of political affiliation, can smell BS. They can smell when people aren't being honest. You don't have to be, brilliantly educated. You don't have to go to, one of the good schools in psych to know when somebody is a snake oil salesman. And so even in some of the leadership of both parties, I feel like I've seen this kind of stifled, this is the best approach. We've met with 20 of the most brilliant people, and this is the way you talk about this issue. And I just don't have an interest in that. And the one thing I will add to that piece, Preston and I, as folks that are in the western part of our state and farther away from these kind of traditional media opportunities, the likelihood of Preston or my work being picked up by the News and Observer or major, social media influencers or whatever that are going to be located typically in these more metropolitan populous areas is much slimmer. And so what can we do to tell the story of our community? And we know for a fact that if we're reading from a script, that's really not going to make any noise, right? If I get up there and go, everybody, as the mayor of Boone, I am deeply concerned about affordability. And I also, as a North Carolinian, care deeply about my neighbor. It's just like the same thing that we hear all the time with no teeth, no action, no honest, this is my story, this is who I am, or this is what I'm hearing. We'd never get talked to, right? If that's all we were saying in Western North Carolina. So we got to do a different approach. And I think that we're happy to do it because that's true to who we are.
Yeah. I will just offer this observation of both of you. I also think there is some level of what you're doing that understands that like it's not all about you, and that like both of you mentioned here, small towns and rural areas are not like and you said this a little bit differently a second ago, Dalton, but like it's almost as if people who, and look, I live in cities, but I've spent time in lots of different types of places. It's almost like I would say people who communicate in any kind of political channel, whether it be campaign or not, talk about small towns and rural areas, and don't talk with small towns and rural areas. And I think that we are trying to flip that on its head, and we have not, we have not totally figured out that formula, but like that is part of what we're working toward. And I just feel like both of you understand that at some, that you can have a platform and that you can talk with a community. And that's a very different type of media. And that is a very different type of leadership that is not about getting a vote or just doing a thing or a issue campaign or something that you might see. Like that is about like literally just having a conversation. And I think that that is something that the right, which has a very different agenda, has done a very good job at, frankly. They are constantly in conversation with their communities. And that's something for us to learn from, I think. If you have any thoughts on that, I will, we will take them and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's, we talked about this way back with Gwen, right? But it's this obsession of, okay, well, why are the Dems struggling with working people? Why are the Dems struggling with, folks that maybe don't have, a degree from a university or whatever? Or why are they struggling with young people now or young men or whatever? And it's like, I think it all goes back to your point, right? Where it's like, we're just not really talking to them in a way that, they want to be spoken to. And a lot of that is just being real and honest and like not reading from a script. And like we say that, right, as working people. I mean, the big mystery of the Dems, right? Why are Black communities not as likely to turn out, right? Like all of these things, all these questions, I think you can boil it down to a very simple thing where it's like, most communities just want to be spoken to like regular people, right? And they don't want to be talked over or talked at. And it's like, it really does not take science or a solid research group to understand that. And I think that, for all the fault of the Republican Party, and for all of the terrible things that they do, I do think they really work to tailor their message in an accessible way and make people feel like they're being spoken to in this kind of candid, approachable sense. And that's something that I don't think we do as good of a job of on the left.
Yeah, agree with everything, Dalton. One of the things that somebody told me that I repeat pretty consistently now. In fact, I was in Washington D.C. yesterday with a bunch of really policy folk, and I got really frustrated in there. I was the only elected official in there, the only local person. Everybody else was what I would describe as a DC insider, right? They were, DC insider Democrats, and brilliant people that have done really good things. That I was in there with people that have, have worked in the White House, and I, gave them props on policy that benefited us here in Fletcher. But when we're having those conversations, I was like, I'm not sure the person's porch who I stand on in Fletcher really understands what the GDP is. I'm not sure they really understand inflation to the to the level that you all understand it, right? And so it's really frustrating to be like, during the presidential election year, hey, inflation's going down. Look at the number, but I know as well as they do when I go to the grocery store, the price was still high. And like that's a really frustrating thing to have. And we gave so many dissertations about that. And the goal really isn't to tell people what to think, right? I mean, it's really to understand like why people think differently than us, like why our neighbors think differently than us. And I think that's one of the really great things about this show is that, we brought these people on, and I hope our listeners left with a little bit more empathy and a little bit more curiosity. And I hope to do that as an elected official, right? And I think that's a good thing to do. And I think it brings people together and it builds community, and we're able to understand each other in a much better and succinct way, and hopefully craft policy in a way that reflects our community, right? That builds it up, that makes us better. And I think we've gotten so far away from that as Democrats, right? I truly think that, we do feel like, these really highly educated Raleigh or DC insiders sometimes. And that's just not the goal, I think, that I have or Dalton has. I mean, it's to be on the ground with the community, understanding the issues that impact them, and talk about it in a way that's not filled with jargon that even I understand, right? And they understand too. And hopefully we've done that with this first season of the podcast, and hopefully we continue to do that on a day-to-day basis as elected officials, as mayors of Boone and Fletcher.
And to that point, I know you want to move on, Jeremy, but that's why me, as somebody that works on national wildlife policy, still talks about critters and things in that way. It's like, even though I can get into the weeds, it's like, let's talk about, what this means for the river here, or the critters that we care about. So I think we do that even on this show.
Look, with that hat and that mustache, you better never lose the word critters. If you start using some sophisticated DC jargon, I think we're all going to call you out on that.
Please.
Yeah, and so just not to bury the lead here, so this show is going to take a break, and I think we'd love to hear from listeners. What did you think of the first season, and what would you like us to do more of? I think from my perspective, we're going to have conversations over the next few weeks just about like, how do we bring more of that storytelling to this show? How do we bring more of the things that you're seeing and out in the community to this show in a way that really like elevates it and highlights it? And the other thing I would say about that is people often say to me, and maybe part of this is having a chip on my shoulder from having done media for 20 years. You guys can call me on that if that's what it is. But it's like, this is hard work, like we don't come in with a script, but even with, and Beacon has several other projects and other work that I oversee. But it's like making sure that we're driving toward that intentional thing is tough, and we want to bring new audiences, which is even tougher. And so I think we're gonna continue to be intentional about it. So I'm excited to pick up the ball when we do after a little break. Okay, let's move to everybody's favorite topic, July 4th and the 250th anniversary
Wait.
Of the country.
Can we reflect a little bit on some of the things we've heard about the show, and we can edit it, but I would like to share some of the takeaways and to your point, and maybe we can edit this, but
it's your show, Dalton. We can go in any direction you all want.
I would just, before we move on, so yeah, if you're listening, please tell us how you think this has been going, because we want to hear that. And two, wrapping up on and 15 episodes has been a lot of work, and we've really all gotten to know each other in the process. We've had a lot of guests on, to Preston's earlier point. And the one thing that I want to underscore that has been so amazing about this is, obviously we've not gone mega viral or anything like that, but like folks truly are listening. Like I've had a number of people in my community and even when I'm outside of the community go, oh my God, you have the podcast with Preston. You have listened to a couple of episodes. And one of my favorite things even happened at Boonerang, where we had two folks come up to us and they were like, oh my gosh, we listened to the podcast. And we have our DOT reps number on speed dial. We call all the time about issues in the town because we know those are state-owned roads and we want them to be more walkable. And I'd like to think that some of the conversations about Costco and stuff helped inform that. And so it's like you have these two people that care deeply about their community. They were excited. Jeremy was talking about before we went live. He's amazed that people want to take pictures with me, which was really funny. But, they wanted to take a picture. But it was like, I think they recognized me as the mayor, and then they saw the podcast as a way to learn a little bit more about my personality. And then through that process, they've hopefully learned a bit more about the local government process, Preston, what's going on in the state, our own takes. And there's a lot of people like that out there. I think the story's just fresh of mind. And that's really what went very early before this started, before we partnered with Beacon. That's what Preston's vision was when he called me and kind of pitched it, is like, can we create this opportunity to display some of the challenges that we have and opportunities and just be ourselves and give, Western North Carolina and leaders like us a platform. And to me, that's like a passing grade. And so as we reflect on season one, I think we've got a long way to go. I want to hear about how we can get better from all of our listeners, from the folks like that out there that have gotten something from this, and also reflect on just the success in engaging people and hopefully letting them know some of what's going on in our communities and ways that we can act on it. And those people actually called out. I like pointed at Preston. I don't think they saw Preston. I was like, yeah, that's my co-host. And they're like, well, yeah, we just listened to the Hop episode with Lori. And they were like,
I recognize the voice.
Yeah. So,
what I would love, and then Preston, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Yeah. What I would love is Dalton, you show up in some other town, obviously not Boone, where you're lesser known, and they're not like, "Are you the mayor of the Boone?" They're like, "Are you the co-host of Do You Even Live Here?" That would be a lovely goal for us. But that's really good to
They did
hear
that
that
to
you're
Preston
getting
in
that kind of
DC.
feedback.
Oh, that's what I was just about to
Okay,
say. Yeah, yeah.
all right, Preston, go for it.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, first to Dalton's point and to Jeremy's point too, I appreciate you all listening to the show thus far. I think it's been incredibly successful. 15 episodes. It's a lot more work than you all probably imagine, and it's right. Um, and it's been so wonderful to hear the stories and have the conversations that I think are so important and need to be raised up, because we have a lot of opinions, but we don't have a lot of conversations about those opinions. And so I'm glad that we were able, to have those conversations. And to a couple of things have happened since the podcast has launched. Well, one, I received an email from a constituent of mine. I guess he isn't a constituent. He's just outside of Fletcher town limits. He's in Fairview, which is just north of Fletcher. And he said, "Hey, Preston, you helped me out with this thing before. Would you be interested in sitting down talking with me? I'm thinking about running for elected office." And I
Mm.
was like, "Yeah, man, absolutely. I would love to do that." And it's a young guy like us. He's in his 20s. And we sat down at the local coffee shop in Fletcher. And he was like, one of the things that actually pushed me towards, wanting to run for elected office was listening to the show with you and Dalton. And I was like, "Wait, what?" I was like, "You got that from our show that you want to run for office?" And to me, like, that was such an A+ grade. Like, I don't think we could have gotten a bigger check mark in my book than that right there. It was cool, and I'll tell the story about somebody in DC knowing the show. But I think that's the coolest thing that's happened to me so far about the show,
Hmm.
because like that's what we're trying. Like, we're trying again. We don't want to have a 30,000 foot view. Like, we want to be there, like in the coffee shops with you all. We want to talk about the issues that you care about. We want to encourage you to run for office or be involved in a way that's meaningful for you and your community. And to sit down and have somebody say, "Hey, I listened to the show. I'm thinking about running for office. How can I do it? You and Dalton are great." I mean, that's incredible, right? And even if that person doesn't run for office, I hope we've encouraged him to pick up a singular issue at a minimum, right? And advocate for that issue in his community, in Fairview, which isn't an incorporated town, but in Buncombe County, right? Or even if it's not an incorporated town, and wherever, right? To advocate for the things that you care about, whether it's in Fairview, Buncombe County, Raleigh, or Washington D.C. Maybe he has a little bit more know-how and took something away from the show to better himself in his community. And then in addition, I was in D.C. yesterday, and again was having a conversation with the U.S. senator, a member of Congress, and a lot of just policy wonk folk. And one of the individuals there was a storyteller, and he was familiar with Beacon, and so that helped us out a little bit. And he's like looking at me and reading my name, and I'm like, "This is weird." I'm not sure if y'all have ever been in like a space where you could feel the eyes on you. And like it was at the end of the conversation, and I'm like, "All right, this guy's eyes is on me." And like I turned to my left, I'm like, "How's it going, man?" He's like, "Good." And he's looking at me. He's like, "Do you have a podcast?" And the woman beside me laughs, and I'm like, "Yeah, I do actually. Do you know about it? Question mark." And he's like, "Yeah, you do it with another mayor, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, how do you know about it?" And he was familiar with Beacon and the project. And after that meeting, when we talked about policy, we all had dinner together where we continued to talk about policy. And one of the cool things that happened, I overheard him talking about Dalton and me as I'm leaving. And he's like, "Yeah, he has a podcast with another mayor from North Carolina, and this guy's a big storyteller." He's like, "Yeah, and they're telling the stories that are happening in North Carolina. It's a really cool project." So to have that happen, alongside a U.S. senator, a member of Congress, and somebody that worked in a cabinet with President Biden, like, what? We're talking about Beacon
Making
Media and
waves,
Beacon
making
Media. And
waves.
do you even live here in Washington D.C.? I mean, that's a big deal, right? And so that was a really cool experience. And I was able to ask him what he thought about the show, when I did ask him to come on the show one day. And so we'll see.
Oh,
I have his card. I'll send a follow-up email. That'd be really cool to have that person. Um, And so we'll see where it goes. I mean,
Great
it's
idea.
been really cool, really great experiences.
And the last thing I'll say, because I'd be remiss, and Preston and I joke about this all the time. Another mission of this show that I think we started doing is showing that regular people can be in politics, that you don't have to be rich, that you don't have to be weird. I mean, we joke around and we're like, oh, to be in politics, it feels like sometimes you got to be a little strange, right?
A
And
little strange, yeah.
yeah, and it's like I think that to most folks, right, and whether it's talking about Pokemon at points or sports or opening a Pokemon card pack at Boonerang or being willing to have a beer or two in public at Boonerang, like it's showing people that you can advocate for your community. You can show up to city council meetings. You can work for the public good and still be an honest, true, regular person that lives a life that looks like the people in your community live. And I think showing this kind of candid nature that we have, that you don't always have to be stifled. You don't have to come from a rich family. All of these things, and I would say that's been a success too. And that's the one thing that I've always wanted to really show people.
I think one of the things that both of you have done a good job highlighting, not just here, but in your sort of day to day lives, is that politics is not just about elected office and running for office. It is about showing up at a meeting, and I think that that process is often viewed as like this is for somebody else. But when you show up at the local level to a meeting, or you correspond with your mayor or a member of council about an issue, like that has a big effect because there is such a small group of people that actually take it upon themselves to do that. And to your point, if all people get out of this is that, like, I can actually take this on for my school, for my community, does not have to be elected office, then we've done something good in the world for sure. All right. Can we talk about July 4th? Is that cool? I know it's still your show. I'm just subbing as host here.
Please do,
Okay.
please do. We're on this is the post show meta show Love Island couch. You're in control, dude. Don't worry.
Yeah, now we have to do a reunion after every season now. This is it.
This is fun, for sure. Beacon is doing a series of videos and content, starting, well, it's Thursday. We are recording this on Thursday, June 25th. But it'll start sometime next week and then go through the 4th. Just talking about July 4th, America 250, the sort of the some of the Trump administration's kind of narrative around this holiday. And as well as just highlighting, I think it is a good time as we have had a difficult year in this country, right? I don't think that there's any way around that, to say the least. I mean, this has been a tough year for freedom, for democracy, and a good year for authoritarianism, and that is not good for anybody. And so, understandably, people have very mixed feelings, including me, about what this 4th means. I think that, just to point out at the beginning, it is viewed as sort of like unpatriotic in some way. If you're having conflicting feelings, I would argue it is the most patriotic thing that you can do is to want to improve things, and want to improve things not just for you but for your neighbors. And so I think that this series is about sort of like what that vision actually is, because I think we need a vision of the future. But let me start here. I'm curious to hear y'all's feelings about this 4th of July, and also how you're reflecting on this 4th of July. Is it reflecting on some of your childhood memories when things were a little simpler and you didn't know exactly what was going on? I think all of that's sort of in there for us. Preston, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, it's yeah. So America's 250th, I think it's been interesting because I think, to your point, Jeremy, people are grappling with this idea of whether to celebrate America or criticize it. And I don't think it's mutually exclusive, right? Like you can do both. We can be honest about and celebrate the incredible ideals of United States of America, while also criticize it for falling short for a lot of the ideals that we said that we wanted to follow, right? And I think my perspective is probably a little bit more interesting as my identity as a young black man in America, right? And so I think America 250 means something a little bit different to me than to somebody else, right? Because we talk about 250 years ago, somebody that looked like me wasn't considered a full citizen, right? They couldn't vote, they couldn't hold office, and they certainly couldn't be a mayor like I am today of a town in North Carolina. And so, what I will say though is that I'm reminded when I'm able to be in these spaces and serve as a mayor or a council member or a member of my community that history can bend, right? The work isn't done. It's progress is real, but the work isn't finished. And I always hold true to me, like a lot of things that Barack Obama says. I think he has like just this so incredible way of talking about America through the lens of a black man that held the highest office in America. And I think his lens is incredibly valuable. I think about when Jeremiah Wright got in trouble for saying all those things, and Barack Obama delivered this just amazing speech about race in America. And I think it actually kind of holds true to the things that Dalton and I do here, because it was one of those things where if you've read some of the literature of Barack Obama, it was like everybody was telling him not to deliver the speech that he was about to deliver, but he did it. He did it, and it was genuine, and it was authentic, and it spoke to the experience of black folk in America. And interestingly enough, it brought people together, right? And so America is not a finished product, right? It's something that's ongoing, it's changing, and every generation gets handed something that is imperfect. And I think our responsibility is to leave it better than we found it. And that's true whether we're talking about civil rights or infrastructure or education or just, how we treat one another. And I'm not sure that the entire story of America is told in Washington, D.C. And I think that's why what we're doing is so important. I think it's told in places like Fletcher, and it's written when people volunteer, like after Hurricane Helene, right? Or, I get to go throw out the first pitch at the Fletcher Little League baseball team, or, people that show up to town meetings. And to your point again, Jeremy, the court of public opinion is really strong. And a lot of people that show up to their meetings, they can really change how policy is shaped in their own backyards. It's, people starting a business or helping a neighbor, and local governments where I think democracy becomes so tangible, right? And that's why I think what we're doing again is so important. But again, it's a project, right? It's what we have here in America is an experiment, and despite all its flaws, I think it's a good experiment that we're continuing to change and pour all the different molecules in, right, to try to figure out the perfect recipe for a place that's filled with justice and equity and happiness, and a place where people can really reach that American dream that we so much sought to fund. And I think a lot of people have lost what that American dream looks like. But hopefully, again, we leave it better than we found it, and people can find that pathway again, or maybe even find it for the first time, right?
Yeah, let me just add the quick context on Jeremiah Wright for people who don't know
Please
that
do. Sorry.
reference.
That's
No,
this is me showing that I'm an older mayor than, sorry, as we joke, I'm an older mayor now.
I'm surprised.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that you remember it, although obviously you've read about it too. But there was a moment in the 2008 of campaign of Barack Obama that he was, one of his mentors had done and said some really controversial things, especially in the Black community. And he gave a speech that is largely credited with saving his campaign at that time. I think, the legacy of Obama is pretty complicated. For a lot of folks, when from a democracy lens, in terms of whether people, were punished for the housing crisis that clearly committed a lot of crimes, whether he was, and those things. But I think that his lens of being the first Black president, it will always be his. And so like the Jeremiah Wright moment, like other just massive cultural moments where frankly, people, along race and class lines were able to sort of um, see beyond, I think, their some of their normal caricatures of people and kind of believe in a bigger vision. That was a moment where we had that in America. And to your point, I think that there's no reason that that kind of moment can't happen again. Dalton, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell a story first. You know, I've struggled with the 250th, and also I've always been somebody that believes in this country in spite of all the warts, and that's always been really awkward. Like in some spaces, I remember I was dating a person back in 2019, and if you're a Southerner, you have a lot of handmade quilts in your family, and I used a quilt as a comforter on my bed, and this one was made by my grandma and it had American flags on it. And I loved it. I thought it was so cool. And it was on my bed, which is maybe funny in terms of the interior design wise. But when she saw it, she was like, man, I almost got the ick at an American flag blanket. Like what's there to be proud of? And
Yeah.
that's always been something that I've had to navigate. And I always go back to that James Baldwin quote where it's like, I love America more than any other country in the world, and for that reason, I criticize her perpetually, right? Like that rough quote, and that's how I feel. Where it's like, I know what America can be, because in a way, I've lived it, and not in this like entrepreneurial bro or whatever. Like I've made it, but it's like growing up. I grew up in a trailer. My parents had never voted. It was just me and my dad. He was the first case in North Carolina tried under Reagan's Minimum Sentencing Act. Somebody with a felony, and now I'm a mayor, and I was elected at 22 years old, and that's incredible, and like I've been able to serve the community and look out for people like me. And I also recognize that there's people that don't look like me that would have had a much harder time or not been able to do that, right? Because of barriers or because of, held prejudice or whatever. And so it's like I have to hold these two truths, right? Where it's like I'm so incredibly grateful to have had the opportunities I've had, and not just through hard work, but community and many other people, in my neighborhood and in my state, which is all under the apparatus of America, right? With all the warts that have invested and believed in me in these ways. And so, we're a multiracial, we're the most multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious nation in the history of the world, is my understanding. And so when I look at the flag, I see it as representing that. And that's really there's few symbols in which you can make all of these things coexist under. And so that's how I get some pride and recognize all the shortcomings that we've had. And even recently I have a North Carolina flag I hold outside my house. I really lean into it because there's some other people that have moved from like up north I like to pick on that'll or from Texas, they'll fly like a Texas flag outside their house. I'm like, come on, you're in Boone, North Carolina. So I fly the North Carolina flag. But when we were coming up on Memorial Day, I put out the American flag and struggled even with that, right? And like that just shows what a weird spot we're in. I'm like, man, what are people going to think if I've got an American flag out of my house? What are they going to think about my political beliefs? They're going to think I hate immigrants. Are they going to think this or that or whatever? And it's sad that we're in that place. And also, I remind myself again, to me, that symbol, and there's a lot of historical baggage. I'm not waxing over that, but it represents the most multi-ethnic, multiracial country in the history of the world, where when disasters come, we look out for each other, we come together, all of these different things. And it doesn't matter what we look like. In Helene, it wasn't where are you from or who was your grandparent. It was we're going to take care of each other. And I think that that's still in every person in this country and for the most part, the world. But, that's kind of how I try to reconcile it. And I also, get so mad I could spit sometimes at the co-opting of what patriotism means. And it's like, Teddy Roosevelt's got a lot of quotes about that too. Like, it's not blind loyalty to the president, right? Like, that's the least patriotic thing you could ever do. And that's the challenge I would put out to the people on the other side. They act like you hate the country, you want to see it fail because you think the president's a knucklehead. And it's like, that's patriotic to me, to be like, hey, you're not helping us meet the moment. You're not helping us represent everyone. And so, I'll definitely have a lot of reflecting to do, as I often do as a citizen on this 250th, and hope, that the next 250 is better than the last 250. I think that's all we can do.
It's very well put. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'd ask one of you to close us out because it's still your show, even though I've stolen your collective chairs for the day. I think one thing that I would just love to hear your thoughts on, that I am not necessarily struggling with, but I think that I'm thinking about in this moment is like, part of what Beacon is about and what I believe in for all kinds of various reasons is just the importance of state and local, right? And I think, so much of our media, national media is just, I mean, there is a level of Trump derangement syndrome out there. Like he's kind of right about that. Like every day just being flooded with this, which also doesn't take away the level of scandal and corruption and authoritarianism that we've seen. Like both of those things can be true. But I think what grounds me is just like thinking about the question, like, what is North Carolina's role in this moment? And what should North Carolina's role be? So anyway, yeah, I mean, that is something that just feels more approachable than sort of the insanity at the national level. Preston, I don't know. What do you say to that question?
Yeah. North Carolina's role. I mean, I don't think that's wildly different than we're talking about as America as a whole, right? And so again, I really start to think down to it from a local perspective. Again, Dalton and I both raised this up, but when the hurricane hit, I mean, it was really neighbors helping neighbors out, right? And that was something that was uniquely specific to Western North Carolina, where we saw where we were able to overcome, despite our political differences, despite our identities, that we were able to come together and help each other out. And then the interesting part afterwards, I think, is where we started to see some of the divisive nature of Hurricane Helene and the politics behind it come out, right? And that's where I started to feel like the divisive nature, appear in North Carolina, specifically Western North Carolina, where Dalton tells a story pretty often where there's so much misinformation about things that were happening in Boone and people that weren't actually there, spewing misinformation about, infrastructure that got destroyed when it in fact was fine. And so I think the frustrating part about the experiment of America is that when these things happen, it has profound impacts on our ability to govern and come together as a nation and as a state in North Carolina, right? And so it was wildly frustrating. And I talked about this recently in DC, to have FEMA provide this direct assistance to folk in Western North Carolina. And it was the first time that they had ever done that. And it was supposed to be something to, give people some trust in FEMA that things are happening, that we're here to provide you with some support. But if you go back and look to see what people were talking about when they received that initial individual assistance, people were like, oh, they're just giving us, I think it was like $600, and that's that. And I was like, that wasn't the case. It was like, this was like the first instance where this happened. And this was FEMA trying to restore trust in the institution, right? And that trust was so far degraded that folk were like, this is all we got, and the government doesn't care about us. Now, there are a lot of places where we can be like, it doesn't feel like the government cares about me. I can unequivocally say that as a Black man in America. There have been times where I've been like, North Carolina doesn't care about me. The United States doesn't care about me. My own community here in Fletcher maybe doesn't care about me. I've told the story about, folk putting up flyers about me in my own community and how hurtful that was, right? And I think of anything too, I think my election doesn't prove that America solved racism. We know that as a fact, right? But I think it does prove that this country, our local communities, the state is capable of changing, right? And I think that's true for Dalton's sake too. Like, they elected a 26-year-old mayor. That's unheard of. That's unheard of. And so I think it does prove that we're capable of changing. And again, America could change so much in this, these first initial 250 years. I hope it can change just as much in the next 250 years. And so again, I think locally from a state perspective, from a United States perspective, it's not all that different. But I think we all have a responsibility to really step up and try to be movers and shakers, and you know, be the change and implement the change that we so deeply want to see in our communities. And again, I think one of the most patriotic things that we can do is continue to criticize elected folk locally, from a state perspective and from a national perspective, again, to make that change that we want to see.
Yep. I mean, I'll add, as far as North Carolina's role, Jeremy, to Preston's point, it's the duty of everybody in this country, but there's a uniqueness that North Carolina has. And so I'll just say the antidote to all this is community, right? It's talking to your neighbors. It's breaking down the walls. It's trying to eliminate polarization, realizing what you have in common instead of what you have that holds you different, right? And that involves going to city council meetings. That involves talking to your elderly neighbor on the hill and saying, what do you need to be successful, right? If there's a pothole that they're hitting every day, like, what can we do to get that fixed? I mean, small things, right? These small community wins, because they scale into big power, and they also break down these walls that make us distrust our neighbors, right? That make us separate ourselves because we look different, or maybe we come from a different place, but we hold so much in common. And the antidote to that is speaking to each other in community. And it sounds pretty elementary in that way, but it's actually incredibly radical, because, basically from the moment we're born now, growing up in like a post 9/11 America, not to date myself, it's like, don't trust your neighbor. I mean, that's kind of like, that's the theme that everybody tells me that lived before and after, right? Is this kind of pulling in and this increased tribalism. And so it's radical to like go knock on the door of the neighbor you've not talked to and be like, hey, I'm Jeremy, I'm Dalton, like, what's going on? Can we talk? And even in doing that, like, some people have been like, I don't want to talk to you, and that's fine. But like, that's how we begin to break down these walls. And so we need to do that everywhere. But the uniqueness of North Carolina is we're a battleground state. We all know that. Okay. But we're also a southern state. We're a state that's growing. We're a state that has more people moving here than nearly any other state. So there's a lot of interesting kind of test cases here where if we can move forward productively in North Carolina, with all of these pressures, with the purpleness of the dynamics here, with a General Assembly that's quite frankly pretty ridiculous, to put it diplomatically, right? If we can move forward productively and take care of community and help become an antidote to some of this toxicity, and it's not just toxicity in politics, it's toxicity in like just the ways that we communicate, I mean, we were just joking about the libs of TikTok thing, but like these terrible things people said about me with no understanding of Boone or me, or it's like that is not the way that we can move forward as a country and still manage to exist and have any sort of public trust and create public good. And so we've got to engage at the local level first. We've got to talk to our neighbors and see, I think what would be the slow cure of this country, because the longer we stay online and get put in our echo chambers, the more we're going to hate our neighbors. And I don't think we make it another 250, not to be very dark, if we continue down that road. I think the only antidote is breaking out of that and building community.
And to your point, Dalton, I mean, that's like the whole purpose of this one of the main purposes of this podcast is like to break down those, those barriers, and, have the ability to, I'm a big advocate of just having kitchen table conversations, like having conversations on somebody's front porch about, things that are happening, whether it's here in Fletcher or Boone or in the state of North Carolina or in our United States in general, right? And I think we've gotten so far away from, again, everybody has an opinion, but nobody really has conversations. Like, we have no shortage of opinions in the United States. Like, you could go to anywhere, right? And you could ask somebody about immigration, healthcare, whatever it may be. They're going to have an opinion on it. Right. But it's like, are we actually having conversations about how to better the opinions that we have and better our union, better our states, better our local communities? Like, no, we're not really doing that. And like, I don't think I get elected without actually pushing myself to go out there. And to be honest, it's really fucking scary to do it, to actually like go out there and knock on somebody's door and talk to them about the issues that they care about and try to have meaningful, policy discussions.
It's radical.
It's radical, dude. Like, people aren't doing the things that you and me are doing. Like, they're not going to somebody's door and talking to them about the issues they care about. They're not holding town halls to like improve the city of Boone, town of Boone besides you, right? Like
Right.
that isn't happening. Like it literally is radical. And that's literally the things that we have to do to better the state of North Carolina and better, right, our entire union. Because to your point, I'm not sure that we make it another 250 years. Because I think people are so deeply they're desiring change. Like they want a reconstruction, like they want a new deal. They want to have like some guarantee, like some promise here in America. Again, I think to figure out how to get back to the American dream, like I don't think we've had any kind of radical change since the New Deal, right? Where we're like, here's Social
Or the
Security,
Great Society.
right, like here are these things that we're going to provide to you to make your life better, to bring us more together, right? We haven't had that promise in a really long time. And even down to like the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, like that's slowly getting chipped away, right? And that wasn't that long ago. Again, like I talk about my grandmother so much and I hold them so true to my heart, but like they fought for that. Like they were alive. Like they were alive during that and are still alive today. Like I can call my grandma right now, and we wrote my grandmother and we wrote. I guess I wrote it, and I interviewed her about some of the chipping away of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And go read that if y'all haven't. But like I think people are desiring radical change here in America. And again, I think we can do it right here locally too by having these conversations and, trying to figure out how to better our union.
And one thing I'll add, Jeremy, and this is going to kill you because involves a comment on the Libs of TikTok thing, but to the point of trying to break down this polarization and talk to people. I live in a college town, Boone. We have a Turning Point chapter here, which obviously probably don't agree on a lot on policy. The president of them, and not trying to get him in trouble. Please don't, be rude to this young man. But he commented on the Libs of TikTok. We can't stand this guy, here in Boone, right? I've never spoken to him, but it's like, I'll take a couple of guesses, right? I know he's probably a renter if he's a college student here, and I want him to have the fairest experience in renting as possible. That's why I legislate in that way. I would hope he's an outdoorsman if he's conservative, right? Most of them identify with that. I want him to be able to fish in clean streams, enjoy our parks, get clean drinking water, okay? When it's snowing out, I want our infrastructure to be so good, he's not going to get hurt when he's driving, right? All of these different things. And so he cannot stand me. I get that, right? Maybe it's because I do a pride post. Maybe it's because I hope that our immigrant neighbors have the same quality of life, right? Maybe it's those things, and I don't want to speak for him. But that's my point about community. And I would challenge them, like, let's sit down. Tell me what I've done that has upset you, right? I know that we disagree on some national issues, but I hope that you have the most fair, equitable experience in my town as possible. I want to advocate for you in the same way that I advocate for everybody that lives here. And the only solution to that is getting out of the comment section of Libs of TikTok and coming to one of my town halls or coming to my office hours and talking to me a little bit about it. And unfortunately, the people that are so entrenched in this political process have no interest in that. But that's my point, right? If you live in the town of Boone, and I don't care if you've immigrated here from Mexico, and I don't care if you're, a TPUSA president, I want you to have a fair shake. I want you to have a good quality of life. And if that's radical, if that makes it to where you can't stand me, I'm sorry, I'm probably not the mayor for you, but that's the way that I lead,
Yeah. Here to that. I'm right behind you there. I mean, I think I've told this story on the podcast before. I mean, I had an instance during a council meeting where somebody approached the dais and put a Confederate plaque in my face while wearing a MAGA hat. And this is somebody I had never met before, like never interacted with, never talked to, but he had all these preconceived notions about me without ever even talking to me. And do I support the Confederate monument coming down in Fletcher? You're right. I do. Right. I do, because I again, my grandmother's fought for things that stands way against it. I stand way against that stuff. Right. And so, yeah, I wanted it down, but you want to know what? I want your potholes filled. I want you to have a fair and equitable shot in society. I want you to feel like that you can achieve the American dream that we all want to achieve. I want you to have fair housing. I want you to have the health care that you deserve, while despite Republicans making really bad policy in Washington, D.C. to essentially cut Medicaid and perhaps close some of the hospitals that serve folk in our area, right? I still will advocate for you and the things that I think that you probably care about and that I care about too. But I don't think we ever had the shot to actually have a conversation to figure out, how I can better your life. It was just Preston doesn't like the Confederacy, which, yeah, I don't like the Confederacy. I don't like that imagery. I don't think that's a radical thing to say.
Because you're a patriot, by the way. They fought the country. They fought America. It's an important thing to say. Yeah.
Literally fought the United States, right?
Yeah.
I don't like that imagery. It's racist. I will unequivocally say that, and it is a fact of it's a fact. It's not an opinion. Again, I keep on saying people have a lot of opinions, but that's a fact. It's racist.
Right.
And
sorry, I was just, you've got us going, Jeremy, but I will say, like, and to that point of this iconography
now we're
and entrenchment, it's like, and I've never shared this publicly, and this is, but it's like, so I'm like 8, 9 generation. I mean, we've been in the South since the South has existed, the George family. So I have direct ancestors that fought in the Confederacy. Okay. Now they were never rich and they never participated in the, large scale because they were all poor mountain people. And I went through this genealogy thing and I found the graves of all my ancestors. And this one had the little, like, served in the Confederacy. And online, people were like putting flowers on the grave and like, rest in peace, son of the South. And like, I know this guy, he's my ancestor. Like, he did not fight for the right team, but he was like a poor cattle driver that got conscripted, that barely owned land, right? It's like this tenant farmer. And here's these people that aren't even related to him using him as a symbol for this oppressive, like, traitorous regime. And it's just
a weird thing to do.
It's a weird thing to do. And again, that speaks to this weird polarization where it's like, if you took the time to learn this individual story, he's actually a great example of why the Confederacy was a failure in so many different ways, right? It's like you go to the mountains where these folks have probably never even seen a plantation and go fight for these rich, evil people that are enslaving human beings, right? And then 100 years later, 200 years later, there's people putting flowers on his grave as a symbol of resistance. And it's like, if we went out and talked to our neighbors, we went out and tried to learn some of these stories, we'd recognize, the gravity of these things that we celebrate. And it's fascinating. So I don't know. Anyways, it's always weird to me. It's patriotic to be like, yeah, I hate the people that fought the United States. But whatever.
Yeah.
What do I know, man? I'm just a guy.
I think I'd also be remiss if I didn't actually talk about one of the success stories that I've had in talking with Republicans, right? Or talking with people that may, more identify with conservative ideals than me. Every year the town of Fletcher has this on Veterans Day. We have this Veterans Day breakfast, and at the breakfast we invite all the veterans in Fletcher that can come have a free breakfast, and we we talk about what it means to serve America. And I gave my remarks. We always have a keynote speaker. And after we finished up, I was just sitting down talking about Fletcher to this guy. Never talked to him before. Didn't know who the guy was. I don't know his name to this day, but I know he comes every year. And I talked to him. And I'm talking to this guy about his, time in the service and the things that are happening in Fletcher, North Carolina, the United States, and the things that I care about. And the longer this conversation goes on, I think the more I'm like I think we're chipping away at each other, right? I think it went both ways. We're chipping away at each other. And we get to the end of the conversation, and this guy has tears in his eyes. Like he's literally crying because of our conversation. And he says, you should come to the local GOP meeting. And I was like, I appreciate the invitation. And I'm glad we got to that point, right? But I was like, I don't think your colleagues there would appreciate me being there. I don't think they would want me in that space. And I was like, and I'm a Democrat. And he's like, well, that's okay. You don't have to come, but I deeply appreciate the conversation that we had. And the ideals that you hold for Fletcher, for Henderson County, for, our nation, I'm behind that. And I'm like, yeah, we should do this more often. Like, we should have conversations. We should talk about our nation, because again, at the end of this conversation, this guy had tears in his eye, was crying, and asked me to come to a GOP meeting. That was our first interaction. Awesome. And like, there's wins here too. And so again, let's have those conversations. Let's figure out how we can make our union better.
And I think you should think about this is my opinion. Take a friend with you, but I think you should think about taking him up on that invite. And I'd even say, Dalton, for your Turning Points guy, maybe we have him on the podcast if we think we can surface some interesting ideas. I am not afraid personally to have these conversations. I know you guys aren't either. Okay, I have to go to a meeting. As Dalton knows, I go to a lot of meetings, which is why he calls me Jeremy Borden, Meetings Unknown. Um, but if the folks want to learn more about Beacon Media, beaconmedianc.org. If you write info at beaconmedianc.org, that goes directly to my inbox, and I will respond to you. And just one quick thought on a lot of what you all said was about community, and Beacon is really built to try to fill some of the gaps that we have lost over the years with the loss of robust local media. And that is what this show is about. That is what our County Beacon project in partnership with Down Home and Franklin and Granville counties is about. It's about, we also have Alfaro, which is a Latino community media initiative that speaks directly to the Latino community and fills some of those really massive gaps in talking to folks who speak Spanish and who are the fastest growing demographic in North Carolina. So we're trying to do our part. And I definitely I feel lighter listening to you guys talk about this, because I do think that community is such a big part of it. All right. Thank you for letting me take your seat for this episode. I enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys soon.
Thank you, Jeremy Bourdain, Meetings Unknown. Go to your next one. We love you.
Thanks, Jeremy.
We love Beacon.
Appreciate it.
Well, and I guess, Preston, we'll work on closing out. I don't think we want to take too much time, but just kind of final thoughts and reflections. And I guess I'll go first and just say thanks, for doing this with me. I've enjoyed, and as I've reflected on, and now we're getting cutesy right now. I'm sorry, everybody, but I was like, you know what? Like, one of the best things about this podcast is getting an excuse to hang out with Preston and Jeremy and the whole team that we built. Sophie, Amando, Pat. But this has just been so fun. A great first season. I'm excited to see how it grows. We'll be able to book out some guests. We should have some great guests for season 2, and also just have fun with it, which I think is so important to us, and continue to be accessible. But it's been a real blast, and I'm looking forward to the next swing of it.
Yeah, man. To our listeners, if you have any feedback for suggestions, people who should have on the show, send us a DM, text us, email us. We're pretty accessible. We're easy to find. Deeply appreciate you all listening. And to Dalton's point, one of the best things about this show, besides being able to interview so many wonderful people and talk about so many incredible things that are happening in our nation, our state, and our localities, has been hanging out with one of my best buds, Dalton George, man. Listen, y'all, the guy's amazing. He's going places if he wants to go places. Boone, y'all are a better community because Dalton George is your mayor. If I didn't live in Fletcher, I would live in only a handful of other places. One of those places is Boone, North Carolina, so I can have Dalton as a mayor. We're super excited to be able to do this show. Beacon Media, our team, you all, our listeners, have been such great partners. I'm deeply grateful to be able to do this, and we're excited for the next season. We're going to have some great guests on. We're going to have some really interesting conversations, and we hope to continue to raise up the stories that go overlooked and have the conversations and talk about the opinions that we've been talking about this whole time, guys. We're excited, and we do live here in Fletcher, in Boone, in West North Carolina.
Preston, that is the nicest thing, and yeah, as you said, let us know what we can do better. DM us. Let us know if you have any ideas. You Live Here Pod on everything. Do you even live here on all the podcast stuff? TikTok, IG, all that jazz. You know how to get a hold of us. And special thanks to Beacon for going through the first part with us and going into the second with us. And thanks for listening, y'all. See y'all after the break.